My husband secretly had an affair with his student. Should I divorce him? I met my husband in college when we were both young and full of hope for the future. We were both 27 at the time, and our connection was instant. We spent our college years learning together, laughing together, and dreaming about the lives we wanted to build. After graduation, we stayed together and eventually got married. Now, at 35, we have been married for 8 years and have a beautiful daughter who was born in 2020. My husband works as a professor at a well-respected medical school, and he is also a doctor. His passion for teaching and medicine was one of the many things I admired about him. I had always thought that his caring nature and dedication to his work meant that he would be completely loyal to our marriage. I believed that the bond we formed in college was unbreakable. I also have a close friend named Sarah. Sarah works at the same college as we do, and she is in the same department as my husband. Over the years, Sarah and I have shared many personal stories and secrets. I trusted her advice and valued her opinion more than anyone else's. A few months ago, in December, Sarah invited me out for lunch. As we sat across from each other at a small cafe, sipping our drinks, she began to tell me something that I never expected to hear. In her quiet, sincere tone, Sarah said that she had started noticing something unusual about my husband. According to her, there was a med student, a 25-year-old young woman, who seemed to catch my husband's eye in a way no one else ever had before. Sarah explained that she had seen my husband and this med student exchange yearning looks. She said that he was usually very reserved when it came to interacting with other women, but when he was around this particular student, everything changed. His expression softened, and his eyes seemed to light up. Sarah was convinced that there was something more than just a friendly conversation happening between them. At first, I couldn't help but laugh at what Sarah was suggesting. I thought she was just overreacting, jumping to conclusions based on what she saw. I reassured her that I trusted my husband, and that I believed there was nothing more than a simple misunderstanding. I even teased her a little, saying that maybe I was just imagining things. But Sarah was persistent. "That's why I didn't tell you sooner," she said. I was confused too. It wasn't that he went out of his way to talk to her, it's just that whenever they spoke, it was like watching a slow-burn romance movie. She looks at him like he's Brad Pitt, and he looks at her the way he used to look at you. Her words stung me, and I remember feeling a mix of disbelief and a deep, unsettling sadness. Even though I tried to smile and brush it off, inside I was beginning to break down. Later that same evening, I casually brought up the topic with my husband. I expected him to laugh it off or to deny any inappropriate behavior, but his reaction was nothing like I had imagined. Instead of laughing, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I'm sorry." His voice was full of regret and pain, and in that moment my heart sank. He explained that he couldn't get the med student out of his mind. He admitted that even though he never acted on his feelings, he had been struggling with them for a long time. He said that he had tried hard to ignore his attraction to her, and that he had even tried to hide his feelings from me because he wanted to protect our relationship. He confessed that he should have told me sooner, but he had hoped that by keeping quiet, he could save what we had built together. I asked him directly if he had ever cheated on me. With a heavy heart, he replied that he had not. He assured me that he never engaged in any inappropriate behavior with her outside of college. According to him, the med student had written him a letter about a year ago, confessing her love for him. He told her that, despite feeling a spark of attraction, nothing could ever come out of it because he understood very well that pursuing a relationship with a student was morally wrong. At that moment, I felt as though the ground was shifting beneath my feet. I couldn't remember exactly how I reacted next. All I knew was that I started to pack my things and made the difficult decision to move in with my parents, along with our daughter. Living under their roof has been a bittersweet comfort in one hand. I have a safe place to heal. On the other, I feel the weight of loss every single day. There was a part of me that still hoped he would come to our doorstep, begging for forgiveness and a chance to rebuild what we once had. However, he never did. He would visit sometimes to spend a little time with our daughter, but he never brought up the painful subject, and I never mentioned it either. The unspoken tension between us became an ever-present reminder of what was lost. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, I found myself constantly checking the med student's social media. I couldn't help but notice how beautiful and charming she was. Her looks were almost doll-like, and her intelligence shone through in every post. Deep inside, I began to believe that someone as attractive and talented as my husband deserved to be with someone like her. I would often compare myself to her, feeling plain and ordinary in contrast to the stunning image she projected. It felt like a scene from a television show. He was the handsome, charismatic man, and she was his perfect match, like Meredith was to Derek. Despite these thoughts, I was caught in a storm of emotions. I didn't know who I was without him, or what I should tell my friends and family. A small part of me still held on to the hope that our love could somehow be restored. But as time passed, I realized that trust had been broken, and without trust, our relationship could never thrive. After much soul-searching, I made the heart-wrenching decision to move forward with a divorce. I knew that the process would be long and painful, but I couldn't stay in a marriage where my trust had been shattered. I even reached out to a lawyer to start the necessary steps to end our relationship officially. On the day I decided to go ahead with the divorce, I met up with Sarah for dinner. I wanted to thank her for being honest with me, even though the truth was painful. Sarah listened quietly as I explained how I felt and how I was ready to take this difficult step. I also asked her about my husband, trying to piece together the full story of what had happened. Sarah told me that, in her opinion, nothing unusual had happened with him aside from him being a little more withdrawn and aloof with everyone lately. She explained that, as far as she knew, he had not done anything overtly wrong. This left me confused, as I had heard a very different story just a short time before. The following day, I went to our house without telling him in advance. I found him alone in his office, and I told him that we needed to talk. He agreed, saying that he would explain everything. As we sat in the quiet of the office, he recounted more details about his relationship with the med student. He revealed that the med student had actually had a crush on him for about 2 years. According to him, her friends even shipped them together, and she would often stare at him during her rotations, blushing whenever he looked or spoke to her. In the early days, he hadn't given it much thought because many girls had shown interest in him, and he always maintained a polite distance. However, about 1.5 years ago, circumstances changed. He and the med student were placed in the same research group, which meant they had to work together closely. Over time, he started noticing her in a way he never had before. He was impressed by her intelligence and her beauty, and he found himself drawn to her personality. The change was gradual, but he remembers the moment clearly when he realized he had developed feelings for her. He dropped out of the research group. This decision was made about a year ago. A few weeks after that, the med student gave him the letter in which she confessed her love for him. When he read it, his first words were, "You can get into trouble because of this." He tried to explain to her that while he was flattered by her affection, nothing could ever happen between them. She asked him if it was all in her head, to which he replied, "It's not just in your head, but nothing can come out of it. I hope you understand." After that conversation, they never interacted again. According to him, the yearning looks that Sarah had described were nothing more than awkward, lingering glances between two people who were caught in an unexpected moment. He admitted that he was still attracted to her, but he stressed that he had no intention of starting a relationship with her. Whether we stayed together or separated, he promised that he would never act on those feelings. He even mentioned that he was willing to change his job and start therapy to help deal with his inner conflicts. I listened to him, feeling a mix of sadness, anger, and confusion. I realized that this had been going on for 3 years, and not once had he mentioned it to me until now. The fact that he had kept this secret for so long shattered the trust that was once the foundation of our marriage. In the end, I decided that I could no longer trust him. I could not live with the constant reminder that he was still emotionally entangled with another person. I explained my decision to my parents, who, although not completely in agreement, offered me their support and comfort. I also reached out to a lawyer, knowing that the road ahead would be long and difficult. but certain that ending this relationship was the only way forward for my own well-being. As I look back on everything, I still struggle with mixed feelings. Part of me longs for the man I once knew, the kind, loving husband who met me in college and built a life with me. Yet another part of me realizes that I deserve someone who is fully present and honest in our relationship. The med student's presence in his life, even if only in his memories and unspoken feelings, has created an unbridgeable gap between us. This is my story, a story of love, betrayal, and the difficult journey toward finding myself again. I have decided to move on with my life, even though the process of healing and rebuilding trust will take time. I have learned that sometimes love is not enough to hold a relationship together, especially when secrets and hidden emotions come to light. Now, as I begin this new chapter without him, I am trying to rediscover who I am beyond being someone's wife. I know that the road ahead will be filled with challenges, but I also believe that by staying true to myself, I can find happiness and strength once more. This experience has taught me that honesty, trust, and communication are the pillars of any relationship, and without them, even the strongest bonds can break. I hope that in time, I will be able to forgive myself for the pain I have endured and look forward to a future where I am free to love again this time, with a heart that is whole and unburdened by the past. My husband had an affair with my best friend. Should I get a divorce? I always believed my life was perfect. My husband, Mark, 39, and I, Sarah, 37, had been married for 7 wonderful years. Together we raised our lively 5-year-old son, and Mark also had a 9-year-old son from his previous marriage. Our blended family felt complete, and I trusted that our love was strong enough to weather any storm. I never imagined that the betrayal would come from the 2 people closest to me. One ordinary day, I received a confession from my best friend, Emily, 36. We had known each other for years, and I had always relied on her for support and honesty. That day, however, Emily's tone was different, hesitant, remorseful, and heavy with regret. She sat me down in a quiet corner of our favorite cafe, her eyes downcast as if she were carrying an unbearable weight. With a trembling voice, she revealed that she and Mark had an affair that began last year and ended around Christmas 2024. I remember feeling a strange mix of shock and disbelief. Emily explained that the affair started when she noticed a distance between us that she couldn't quite pinpoint. She admitted that, while we had been close for years, she had always sensed something unusual in the way I sometimes reacted to Mark's actions. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than normal fluctuations in any long-term relationship. I never imagined that her hidden feelings would lead her to cross a line I thought was sacred. According to Emily, the affair began in October 2024. It was after a children's Halloween party that she felt a surprising attraction toward Mark. She said that even though she loved her own husband, their marriage had lost its spark. Her sex life had dwindled, and the romance she once cherished was gone. At that party, something shifted inside her. Even though she had always admired what I had a stable and loving relationship, she began to see Mark in a new, dangerous light. At first, Emily claimed it was just innocent flirting. She mentioned that a few casual texts were exchanged between her and Mark, under the guise of asking for advice about her troubled marriage. I had always thought it was natural for friends to seek comfort in each other during difficult times. However, the conversation soon took a turn. The texts became more suggestive, more daring. Before long, what started as harmless advice turned into an intimate exchange of sex messages. Emily admitted that her texts grew bolder and more flirtatious as she struggled with her growing attraction. The confession hit me hard as she continued. Emily told me that after those initial texts, they began meeting in secret during the weekdays. She estimated that they had been together around 20 times. Each meeting was filled with passion, but also with a deep sense of guilt. Both of them knew that what they were doing was wrong, yet the allure of forbidden desire overpowered their better judgment. They eventually decided to end the affair around Christmas, driven by the overwhelming weight of their conscience. Hearing this, my heart broke in more ways than one. I felt betrayed not only by Mark, who I had believed was devoted to me, but also by Emily, my so-called best friend. I had trusted her with my secrets, my joys, and my sorrows, never expecting her to become entangled with the person I loved the most. The revelation left me feeling hollow, as if all the love and trust I had built over the years were now crumbling to dust. Throughout that difficult day, I was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotions. I felt anger, confusion, sadness, and deep sorrow. The shock was so intense that I found it hard to even form a coherent thought. When I received messages from Mark while I was still trying to process the confession, I pretended to be busy. My mind was in a fog, and I couldn't decide whether to confront him immediately or to take some time to process everything. As the day wore on, my body reacted to the emotional turmoil. I ended up throwing up twice, as if my body was physically rejecting the betrayal. Every fiber of my being was screaming for an explanation, for some way to mend the broken trust that now lay shattered on the floor of my heart. I knew that soon Mark would be returning from a short weekend trip with his oldest son, and the thought of confronting him filled me with dread. I spent the day in a state of suspended disbelief, pacing back and forth and trying to gather my thoughts. Part of me wanted to call him immediately and demand an explanation. Yet, another part of me hesitated, wondering if it would be better to remain silent for a while, to delay the confrontation until I could think clearly about what to do next. I felt torn between the need for immediate confrontation and the desire to carefully plan my next move. Every moment of waiting felt like an eternity, with the truth of the situation growing heavier in my mind. As I prepared to pick Mark up from the airport that evening, I felt as though I were standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to jump or to retreat. I couldn't help but replay the events in my head. The texts, the secret meetings, and now this confession from Emily. I thought about all the moments when Mark had reassured me with romantic gestures, when he had been so attentive and loving that I never suspected he was capable of such betrayal. It all felt like a cruel twist of fate. In the quiet moments before his return, I sat alone with my thoughts, trying to muster the courage to face him. The hurt was overwhelming, and every thought of his charming smile or gentle touch now became tainted with betrayal. I questioned everything I had ever known about our relationship. How could the man I loved be capable of such deceit? And why would my best friend, someone who was supposed to be my pillar of support, involve herself in this scandal? In that moment of solitude, I wondered what the future held for me. The thought of confronting both Mark and Emily was terrifying, yet I knew that hiding the truth would only lead to more pain in the long run. I had a choice. I could either continue to pretend that nothing was wrong, or I could face the painful truth and decide how to move forward. The decision was mine, and it would shape the rest of my life. As the hours ticked by, I began to draft what I would say. I considered expressing my hurt and disappointment calmly, but my mind was clouded by raw emotion. The simple, everyday words I had always used to communicate with Mark now felt inadequate to capture the magnitude of the betrayal I felt. Yet, I knew I had to speak my truth no matter how difficult it might be. When Mark finally walked through the door that night, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The air was thick with unspoken words and shattered trust. I watched him, trying to decipher any sign of guilt or regret, but he appeared as cheerful and composed as ever. His presence was a painful reminder of the life we had built together, life that was now marred by secrets and lies. In that quiet, tense moment, I resolved that I would no longer allow the deception to rule my life. I needed time to think, to heal, and to decide whether I could ever forgive him. The road ahead was uncertain, and the prospect of rebuilding trust seemed almost impossible. Yet, amidst the heartbreak, I clung to the hope that I would eventually find a way to reclaim my sense of self. Looking back on that day now, I see it as the turning point in my life, a moment when the world as I knew it shattered into pieces. It was a day filled with painful revelations and difficult choices. Though the betrayal cut deep, I realized that I had the strength to endure it, to rise above the despair, and to eventually forge a new path forward. The journey to healing would be long and arduous, but I was determined to rediscover my worth and rebuild my life on my own terms. In the end, the truth had set me on a path of self-discovery and resilience. I learned that sometimes, the people we trust the most can hurt us in ways we never imagined. And while the pain of betrayal may never completely fade, it can also be the catalyst for a new beginning, a chance to redefine who we are and what we truly deserve. That night, as I sat in the quiet of our home, waiting for the storm of confrontation to break, I promised myself that I would not let this betrayal define me. I would face the challenges ahead with courage, even if it meant stepping into the unknown alone. And though the wounds were fresh and the future uncertain, I held on to the belief that I could eventually find peace and happiness once again.